Welcome back to Parenting and Mental Health from Bay Community Health. As always, I'm Dr. Amanda Court, and I'm here to go over some more stuff about parenting and mental health. I do want to let you know that today I did do a very special interview with one of our local moms, Katie Moore, and I'm going to post that. That interview will be posted next week, and people will get to watch that. And that will be our Wellness Wednesday for next week. So please tune in to see that interview. Right now we're live. I posted on Facebook the Zoom link. I hope people will come and join and talk about parenting and mental health. Okay, well, let's get started. So today, in honor of Halloween, we are going to talk about parenting, mental health, parenting, and fear. So when you're a parent, there are times when a child will do something that may upset you or disappoint you. They may break something or do something, and sometimes we react in ways that we aren't proud of, or maybe we get nervous and we get anxious because we want what's best for our kids. So this isn't about judgment or criticism. It never is in here with parenting and mental health. It's all about talking about what the research says and helping people get some tips and tricks on ways that we can be better as parents. I love the opportunity to do this, and thank you all, because it's giving me a chance to find more ways to be the best parent that I can be. So thank you for letting me do this and share this with you all in our community. So again, in honor of Halloween, I thought it would be fun to talk about parenting and fear, because a lot of us often make decisions about our kids based on a fear that we have. So when your response is driven by fear, that will often induce fear in your children. And we do this sometimes just to get them to comply with our wishes, right? Do this or else. So a lot of punishment-driven reactions are actually fear-based. So if you've done that before, then you were probably operating out of a fear-based parenting technique. It's perfectly okay, and it's only human to get upset with our kids. We all do. We get upset. We feel uncomfortable or annoyed or frustrated by something. Happens to all of us. It's just important to keep in mind how you respond. And I tell this to people in my office all the time. Our emotions are there for a reason. They're our body's way of communicating with us to tell us something's going well, something's going bad. Hey, we don't like this. And that's going to happen. And the emotions are real and they're all valid. What we can control is not necessarily the emotion, but how we react to the emotion. So if I feel anger, but I don't act out in anger, the acting out is what I have control over. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. We're going to talk a little bit about what happens when we're operating under fear-based parenting. Again, I've done it. And I would be surprised to ever hear parents say they haven't done it. So we do it, and while it happens once in a while, no big deal, right? We want to just make sure that we're not operating out of a fear-based system all the time. So what we've learned is that these moments of fear-based parenting, if they're not often, then it won't have much impact. But if it is often, then it can have more of an impact on our kids. So last week, it was movie week. And it was movie night, and we had a chance to watch the documentary Chasing Childhood. I hope you got an opportunity to watch it. If you haven't, the video from this is posted on Facebook. It may ask you to register. It just asks for an email, and I think it's just a way for them to track how many people download the documentary. It's free. I did it. I've gotten zero spam from them since. So, and I get nothing from this. I found this video. I watched it several times. I checked out some of their sources. And I will just say that the video is not backed. This isn't something that Bay Community says this is their 100% what they believe in. It's just meant to be thought-provoking. people have different levels of comfort, and what they talk about in that movie is about how we've become such a fear-based parenting society that we don't let our kids be children anymore, right? We control every minute and every second of their day, and they talk a lot about how when we parent like that, sometimes they're called helicopter parents, or I've heard the word bulldozer parent before too. When we parent like that, we're often taking away autonomy from our kids, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So if you get a chance and you have an hour, the documentary is an hour. It's pretty entertaining. I enjoyed watching it. Like I said, I've watched it a couple times, but we just want to talk about what that movie talks about, what fear-based parenting is. And it's, when parents use their power and their control to try and get kids to comply with their expectations, right? And so it's not something that's great. It's something that we do once in a while. And I want to explain why maybe doing that isn't so great and what it can do to our kids. And the movie gives some examples as well, in some ways people are trying to fix that or change that. So first of all, I know it's Halloween and we talk about scary things, and that's why I'm talking about fear. I just want to first acknowledge the fact that fear has a purpose, just like pain does. Physical pain has a purpose. In fact, there's a disorder, and I apologize to all the psychologists out there that teach this because I've forgotten the name of the disorder, but there is a disorder that that's very rare that doesn't allow people to feel pain. And when they can't feel pain, they often don't live very long, because pain keeps us from doing really silly things. Just think about the classic reaction of touching something hot and then jerking back. That pain response is keeping us from continuing to burn our skin and burn our bodies. So that's the purpose of pain, right? To keep us out of trouble, to keep us away from a threat. Fear does the same thing. Fear makes our heart pump faster. It makes us breathe more quickly. It's prepping our body to run away, to fight, or to go hide. Okay. And that's the purpose, because evolutionarily, we were cavemen and women out in the wild. We were nomadic, and we found places to sleep, and we had large animals that were where they preyed on us, right? The world was dangerous. Things were dangerous. There was always something trying to kill us, eat us, whatever. Our world has gotten significantly safer. I first want to acknowledge there are still some places in the world where people do feel like they live in constant threat, and hopefully one day we can figure out a way for that not to be true. For most of us, certainly most places in the US, we live in a very safe world. Yes, bad things happen. And of course, those bad things are reported on the news, and so it worries us. However, for the most part, chances of something really bad, right, that the things that are reported on the news happening to us, is pretty rare. And so fear has a purpose. It's to prep us, our bodies, to get away from extreme danger. However, in today's society, where that extreme danger really doesn't exist that much, fear has now come into place to have perceived threats that don't really exist. So let me explain a little bit further. So there is a man by the name of Tony Robbins. You've probably heard of him before. He's a famous motivational speaker. He's spoken all over the world. He is an entrepreneur, et cetera, et cetera. And he has an acronym for fear. And he says that fear is false evidence that appears real. So, and he uses it in the context of people trying to go out and be an entrepreneur and starting a business or starting something on their own, and they're too fearful to leave what they're doing to go do that. And he probably has applied to other aspects of life, but usually the subject area where he's talking is that. When I was listening to that, though, wow, did that resonate as parents? We often get really fearful of things where the evidence really isn't there, right? So maybe we're afraid to let our kids walk down the street because we saw a teenager drive by fast. There's a sidewalk, or there's a big shoulder where the kids can walk in. Or maybe there's something else, right? You're fearful to leave your 12 or 13-year-old home alone for any length of time because you're afraid that something bad might happen. But has there been evidence to support that? Maybe they haven't always been the best kid and they've not always followed the rules or done things right, but have they done something that would make you fearful of that particular situation? So that's also a part of it, is sometimes we take situations where, oh, well, they lied to me about doing their homework, and we take that over into a different situation. So I want us to really think about that. And I want us to use this as kind of a compass for our parenting. And when we recognize, do we have evidence, or do we have false evidence that appears to be real? And where is that coming from? And what's really going on? What's actual observation? What's actual data that supports or being fearful or doesn't support it, right? What's really going on? You know what I'm actually fearful of? I'm fearful of one of my children living in my basement past, at 30, with no ability to do anything for themselves without my approval. That really scares me. I want my kids to be independent. I want them to feel like they can live on their own and live their own lives. I don't want them to be dependent on me, because when they're an adult, I want to be able to live my retirement life out without having to tell them how to do everything. That would be wonderful. I am definitely fearful of having this kid that's an adult, but still a child, because they've always depended on me and never learned how to do something on their own. So let's dive a little more into that. I hope that evokes some fear in some of you. Okay, so fear creates stories, and that false evidence, right, creates a story. So I quoted this earlier, the idea that the idea behind fear-based parenting is that if children fear the consequences of not complying with the parents' wishes, they will be more likely to do what we say. So we create really harsh consequences, or maybe we tell them that something's more dangerous than it really is. I have 100% made that mistake. I don't fully remember the story, but I think at one point I was trying to get my daughter to wash her hands or something. And I come from a science background. I started talking about, bacteria and viruses and all this stuff. And wow, did she get scared. And it was probably not completely age appropriate, but I thought I was being good, leading with facts. What I realized was, okay, is it 100% necessary that I needed to scare her about getting some, flesh-eating bacteria, when it's probably not likely, right? Went a little overboard. So that's full disclosure on mine. I realized it very quickly, went back in and tried to repair. Actually, to be fair, I think my husband pointed it out to me, and then I had to go back in and repair. But I did. I went back in and we talked more about it, and we made it a discussion, which in all of these parenting series, we've talked a lot about, right? If we make mistakes as parents, which we all do, no one gets out of that, right? And our kids make mistakes too. Just talk about it. Talk about, yeah, I was scared they made me a mistake, but you know what? You're really good at this, and you're still learning, and it's okay to make a mistake. It happens, right? So let's go back to this quote. Does fear really create compliance? It can. It does. For research shows fear, whether you're talking about government evoking fear or a leader evoking fear at a company or a country, yes, there's tons of historical data that says fear can create compliance for a very short period of time. And after that, it doesn't work. So what ends up happening is usually a lot of ugly stuff. You can look up any, fear-based ruler from historical times and how long it lasted and what was going on underneath of all of that wasn't really working for them, and how things kind of crumbled in the end. So let's think about ourselves. Stories that we've created fear in for ourselves. And where did they come from? Where's that false evidence in your life around your parenting where you've created false evidence? Like I said, I did it because I was trying to get my kid to wash her hands because she kept getting the cold. Well, she's in elementary school. They get colds. I was sick of dealing with the kid that couldn't sleep well, and it was my own frustration that I was then trying to scare my child to wash her hands. What did it do? It gave her nightmares, it made her cry, and it took a while, even longer than probably the cold would have lasted, for me to undo my fear-based parenting. So what was the story I was telling myself? How was I validating myself to go there? Well, I was telling myself that this was the right thing to do. I was giving her facts. Yeah, they were facts. But, when you're talking to a 7 or a 6 or 7-year-old, when you're giving them percentages, that's not necessarily something that's going to speak to them, right? Maybe not my best decision. So what are some of the stories we're telling ourselves? I want you to just think about that. Keep it in mind for a little bit. Okay. So when we're using fear to control, what sounds scarier to you? A child breaking an arm or a child developing a debilitating mental health illness or addiction that they have for the rest of their lives? Guess what heals faster? The broken arm, right? So to me, the latter is scarier. And unfortunately, fear-based parenting has been associated with, through research, looking at how parenting styles develop, figuring out how parents parent, fear-based parenting can lead to depression, anxiety, eating or behavioral disorders, agoraphobia, which is basically a fear of social situations. And alcohol misuse was specific for this particular study. But it can lead to addiction, right? They're trying to hide their own fear or pain. So this stuff sounds a lot more serious than using fear-based parenting for, hovering over our kids at a playground or being afraid to let them, go get a job for the first time, things like that. We want to make sure that we're really not using these false evidence to support a fear story that we have in our head that may or may not be, in the bigger picture, the bigger scheme of things, the way we want to go. And I encourage you to talk about those fears out loud, right? So those fears are things we all have. We all have fears, and a lot of them come from our own childhood or experiences. And so talk about them. Talk about what does, make you fearful, but then really take a moment to think about what your child's strengths are and where you can, and we'll talk about that in a second, where you can let them have a little autonomy and not feel like the world is such a scary place that they can't go outside, right? The other thing that wasn't in this study, but other research has shown that fear-based parenting can also lead to increased rebellion, which I talked about a little bit earlier from like a historical perspective. Fear-based leadership doesn't work for very long. It works in the short term, but not over time. And it also has a huge breakdown of trust between the parent and the child, or whomever is trying to evoke the fear, right? So this was in our session from last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago, actually. If you're not sure if you're fear-based parenting, the classic do as I say without any explanation or discussion. And if not, there's these consequences. That's kind of leading with fear. It depends on how far you go. Sometimes we think, fear prevents. What we've learned from the research is that if we lead with fear, it can prevent the child from learning from their experience. They're so scared to do anything. They're so scared to get a B or to get a bad grade that all they're worried about is the grade versus what they got out of the experience of that particular assignment. It actually increases insecurity in children. Think about the anxious parent that hovers over their child. Be careful, be careful, be careful. If you had to hear that all day long, how confident would you be in doing just about anything? Not very, right? Which, of course, decreases your child's ability to be resilient. Going back to the grade situation and the movie that I mentioned earlier that was last week, they talk a lot about kids being pushed to have these perfect grades. And if they don't, they completely crumble because they don't really understand the whole purpose of it, and they're just pushed, the grade is the whole outcome, right? And so when you lead with that fear of not doing something perfectly, which I say almost every week, there's no such thing as perfection, that it decreases the child's ability to deal with not doing something as well as they want to. It encourages unfounded judgment. This comes up in the Chasing Childhood movie. It's something I've certainly experienced as a parent. I have the utmost compassion for all of us, because we do have this constant feel of judgment, right? As a parent, when our child doesn't do something well, or they act poorly, or maybe they're not polite, or maybe they have a tantrum in a store, or maybe they do something worse, right? But at the end, as a parent, we take that on as our own mistake, our own thing. And it creates this unfounded source of judgment for us. And then we project it back onto the kid. So I just, want to put that in there, that when you lead with fear, you're often putting judgment out there, and you're also dealing with judgment and criticism and your own need for, or, seeing that. Obviously increases anxiety, and will, of course, inhibit a child to take risks because they're scared to make a mistake. And life's filled with risks. And while you might want to learn to take calculated ones, help your kid learn how to take calculated ones, which we'll talk about in a second. Welcome, Leslie.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So we've been talking about fear in honor of Halloween and fear-based parenting. And what I would ask the group to kind of think about, people that will be watching this on their own later, is think about things from your own childhood that you did and loved, or you did and you had a great time and you have this memory, and you won't let your kid do that now. Just think about it. Now, if you came up with something, what are the reasons behind keeping your child from doing the same activity? Now, some might feel more valid than others, right? So maybe when you were a child and you could ride your bike from your house to your friend's house, it was a road that you might have seen, one car and a tractor on in an entire day, right? It wasn't a busy road. It wasn't a big deal. Or maybe it was even a dirt road, right? So that felt safe. You did it all the time. Well, now where you live on a busy road. Maybe you live on Route 2, right? Which is a pretty busy road, or even Muddy Creek gets pretty busy. Okay, so maybe you don't want your kid riding their bike on Muddy Creek or Route 2. So, okay, I get that. What else though? What else did you have fun with? If you lived in a rural area, maybe you went and played in the woods. Do you let your kid just go play in the woods now? If you lived in a city, and the Chasing Childhood video does a really good job of looking at urban parents, in particular around New York City, and they talk about letting their child ride the subway. And, when is that okay? And what I love about that, and what we're getting to, and I keep alluding to, is what the parents do before they allow them to do that is they have a discussion with the child ahead of time. So think about what's keeping you from letting you allow your child to have the same amazing experiences you had as a kid, because you're scared that something bad might happen. And go back to our acronym for fear. Is it false evidence, right? Is it false evidence that's keeping you from allowing your kid to experience something that feels autonomous and freeing? And what aids in these fears? I've seen this a lot. I see this in couples therapy a lot. What aids in your fears? Does technology aid in your fears? I hear Life 360 is an amazing piece of technology. It can be very helpful, especially in the less than 1% chance that someone gets in some horrible accident or something awful happens. You'll be able to locate them. But for the 99%, right, Life 360 can serve a purpose. It can help keep people accountable. I get all that. Is it doing that for you and you're able to stay in that lane, or is it feeding some sort of fear-based parenting more? And where does it land with your family? And I'm not saying it's a right or a wrong thing, but where does technology fall for you? And what is it really doing for you? Oftentimes I find with couples, they have these location-based apps and they're using it to check in on each other. And what's happening every time they check in on each other is actually a little bit of a degradation of trust. And then the more it happens and the more people aren't where they say they get more and more paranoid. And it just creates this kind of cycle of mistrust. So just check in with that. Is there a fear for parents that, are high achieving or have high expectations, and they have those expectations for their kids? Are you fearful that if your child isn't in the STEM program or doesn't make the travel whatever team or doesn't make some club team, that they're missing an opportunity for a bright future? Really check in with that. I see it a lot where I live, where we have these parents that are putting, 6, 7, 8-year-olds in club teams. I'm not saying that is inappropriate. For some kids, it's absolutely the right thing to do. They love the sport, they want to do it. And then there are other parents that push a kid that's kind of like, I could take it or leave it. So what is the push? Are you doing it because if you're doing it because you're fearful that your child's going to miss an opportunity to, I don't know, make the Olympics one day, go pro? What is the end game there, right? So again, it's just a reminder to think about where you're coming from. Okay, so we're talking a lot about where the fear-based parenting comes from. I'm going to finish with this, and then we're going to go into, okay, well, how do we deal with this? So what's usually going on behind all this, right? When we fear, we fear that we're going to mess up our children. Okay, let me lay that one to rest. We all mess up our children. For good, for bad, we've all going to do something they're going to remember totally different than the way we remember it. And someday you'll be able to have a discussion about it and go, what? Really? That bothered you? I didn't realize that bothered you. And you'll probably be able to laugh about it, or maybe not, or hopefully you'll just be able to have a good discussion about it. We all have a chance to, their kids will remember something totally differently than the way we remembered how something went down. We're afraid something bad could happen to them. This is something that I talk about a lot when I teach analysis classes, that there are biases within us that when we see from sensationalism, because news channels report the worst, right? And those worst or those most awful things that happen are not the norm. Kids in South County are not getting kidnapped every day, right? And if I had the percentages right in front of me, I would leave them to you, but I can rest assured that really bad things are not happening every single day in this area to our local children. Are there things that are happening? Yes. Are there things that we need to be fearful of, so fearful that they're not allowed to go to their friend's house or walk next door to a friend's house? Probably not. So just again, check in with that. Sometimes we feel that our child won't measure up to their own potential. Gosh, I fear that about myself every day. And if I don't give myself some grace, then I'm going to be an anxious mess, because what is my greatest potential? I know that, and I find that, and I catch myself doing that with my own kids all the time. I see these glimmers of amazing things, and I think, oh my gosh, I have to push them to do this. So if I don't push them to do this, then they'll never get to reach it. Well, let me push them. Let me teach them why it's important to stick with something, and let me check in with why I'm pushing them, right? It's not to say you shouldn't push them. It's just check in what your reasoning is behind pushing them and having real conversations with your kids. Even when they're younger, you might be surprised. Sometimes they have real legitimate reasons why they don't want to do something anymore. And so just talking to them and having that respect to let them express their feelings can be really powerful. We fear that we won't know how to guide them once they get to be a teenager. So we lock everything down when they're younger. I have to tell you, the kids that I met in college that were never allowed to do anything at home when they were in high school and younger, when they got to college, they were the biggest partiers because they finally felt free. And that was really scary. I mean, there were some really dangerous things that they did. The kids that kind of were given some autonomy along the way and learned about why something might be restrictive or something not, that had these really good discussions, seem to be the more even keel kids. And I would say most of us fear that we're going to be inadequate parents. You know what? I say this almost every week. You're doing the best you can with what you have. And this whole parenting series is to help you remember that you have us as a resource, that these sessions are meant to bring parents together, to talk about, to create discussion around, to create discussion with schools and other resources around how to get resources to be a better parent. Because we all have inadequacies and we're doing the best we can. Okay. So one last thing about, going from fear to feeling free. So one thing that the Chasing Childhood movie talked about last week was giving kids more time to play freely and not dictating every second to them. This goes back to that autonomy thing. And the more you talk to kids about that, and you let them have free time. Now, not necessarily letting the free time be all on a screen, because that's also, honestly, that's a technological dictation, right? They're being kind of told what to do in the video game, but getting them outside, getting them at a playground when they're younger, letting them figure it out. Even if they say they're bored. My classic answer to my 8-year-old, which she hates, but I repeat it, and she's starting to get the hint that I'm not going to give in. She comes up to me and says, I'm bored. I'm like, great, you're going to be creative then. Or great, you're going to come up with ideas. She doesn't like that answer, and it's not what she expects. She wants me to give her something to do, and I won't. I didn't always do this. It was given to me by someone that I admire. And it's taken a while, but it's starting to work. She starts to come up with stuff on her own, and I let her be. So, this graphic I love, because it's kind of like a graveyard, which is a little bit scary, but there's a playground there, right? Sometimes letting your kid go to a playground and play by themselves without you watching over them can feel scary, but just talk to them about, okay, well, some weird person comes up to you. What do you do? Right? Like, what's our address? What's my telephone number? Things like that. So they know what to do, and that's going to increase their confidence. And I have a hunch you'll be really surprised in a good way how well your kids handle that. It doesn't go well every time, but it will start to go well the more you give them that ability to stretch their legs and learn what it means to be, an autonomous human. And what we're finding is that when kids have more free play during the day, they actually, that more free play has an inverse effect, right? So it decreases the amount of undesirable behavior, and then it's correlated with increases in confidence. So those are things that we want in our kids, right? We want them to have more desirable behavior, and we want them to be more confident. So giving that time to have free play where we're not dictating what they do every day. We're not dictating that they go to this sport or that dance troupe or whatever. We give them time just to be creative and play. And if you look at any species in the world, all animals take time when they're, babies or children to play, because that's how they learn how to be in that adult animal. We are no different. We need time to play too. Okay, so how do we get there? Finally, I know I've been promising this for a while. So some of the ways you can do that, I talked a little bit about it earlier. When you're ready and you figured out some things that you're willing. So first you have to take a hard look at like how you're parenting and where are the things that you might be leading with fear. Is it really something that's meant to be fearful? Or is it something that maybe you could back off of that fear? You realize the fear is coming from something that doesn't exist. Maybe it was something that happened in your childhood, but that doesn't exist where you are now, right? So first you have to start with that awareness of yourself. From there, you can have those conversations and decide what little things you can start to do with your kids to give them that little bit of freedom. Maybe it means that you let them walk down your long driveway to go get the mail by themselves. Or maybe, with really little kids, like you tell them to clean up their toys on their own and you leave and let them try and clean up their toys. They're probably not going to do great the first time. They'll get distracted. they'll stop doing it. So come in, help them a little bit, give them some encouragement, encourage them for what they did do well. And again, it's just a really slow incremental thing where you start to give them a little bit more freedom, a little bit more responsibility. Chores are good for kids, right? So give them something, but make sure you give them something they can do and it doesn't take over their world, right? So there are certain things like maybe taking out the trash or making their bed, right? Just pulling up the comforter over their pillows can be enough to make a bed for a young kid. It doesn't have to be, the military style, pop a coin off the made bed. So managing those expectations and making them small, like starting small and making them something that child can reach, will make you build confidence. It can build trust between the two of you, and then you can start to give them more responsibilities, right? Listening to them. I mentioned that earlier. When they don't want to do something, or even there's something structured they've been doing that you've been pushing, they don't want to do it, hear them out. Even if you disagree with them, hear them out. And then, just like you would with another adult, explain your reasoning behind it. I talked to a parent the other day that dealt with this. They were talking about putting their child into a STEM program, and their child was reluctant, felt like that child was already really stressed, already involved with a lot. They were afraid they weren't going to perform well if they also did this. And the parent talked through the steps with them and talked about the benefits, and they did like a pros and cons sheet, and they really talked together and worked together. Ultimately, the kid ended up applying, but it was something that they spent the time on listening to each other, and that built trust with each other too. I talked about this at the playground, going over your plan Bs, right? So you go to the playground and you hurt yourself. What are you going to do? Because mom or dad's not there, right? Where can they go, right? Maybe they're supposed to ride the bus, or they rode the bus by accident and they come home and you're not there. What do they do, right? So, or you give them the autonomy to ride the bus home before you get home from work. My generation, that was kind of a normal thing. And we had a lot of things that were part of what we had to do when we got home before our parents got home. Something that I put in here is, and this is something we learn as therapists, is learning how to manage your emotions when they make a mistake. So if you can lower the large or big emotions when they make a mistake, hopefully if you give them little things to do, their mistakes are going to be little. So as you grow in time, when they make a mistake, you're kind of more set up and they've built more trust and more confidence, and this will work. If you start with a really big thing, like you let your 3-year-old carry all your porcelain dishes across the kitchen and they fall and break, yeah, maybe that was too big of a responsibility for the 3-year-old. And that's going to feel dangerous and scary, and there might be a big reaction. So start small so that when they do make a mistake, you can kind of regulate your emotions a little, take a deep breath, remind yourself a mistake is just an opportunity to learn, and maybe even just say that out loud, even while you're still feeling angry or frustrated, so that you can put yourself back in this space of, okay, I want them to go back to this, right? Okay, they made a mistake, and model that. We all make mistakes. So when I make a mistake, even when I'm mad, I have to kind of stop myself and go, wow, well, I just made a silly mistake. And you know what? I did that because I wasn't being mindful and I was in a rush. I wasn't paying attention. I walked through it in front of my kids, and then I laugh about it and I tell them what I learned. And that's what I always ask my kids when they make a mistake, well, what did you learn from it? The more you do that, the better they're going to be able to answer it. The first time they're going to say, I don't know, I didn't learn anything. And you can help them through it, right? And that comes into the last one, ask questions and be curious with them. If they did something that you weren't thrilled with, ask them questions. Say like, hey, well, why did you go do that? Like, what were you feeling in that moment? What were you looking for? Just be curious and try to ask questions that aren't super judgy. Like, why in the world would you do that? Right? That question, probably not going to go over so well. So these are just some things to start with. And really getting out of fear-based parenting to a free, more compassionate parenting is just a lot of being self-aware. I'm not there all the time. Again, this is a non-judgment zone. It's just more information to say like, hey, if you lead with that, like, do this or else, that's not really helping your kid become autonomous, confident, self-sufficient. Like I said, my big fear is I don't want my kid living in my basement at 30, depending on me for everything. That sounds like the worst retirement ever. So if you don't want that, let's work together to make really autonomous, independent, healthy, confident humans. So that's what I have for us tonight. Like I said earlier in the session, I am going to post an interview I did with one of the local moms. We talk a lot about parenting and mental health, what she's experienced. She's raised 4 kids in South County, or I guess is still raising them. She only has one that's a full of, an adult. And yeah, so that's what we had tonight. Leslie, you're our, sole participant tonight. Do you have any questions?
Actually, no, more like a comment. I feel like I have 5 of my own, and the only way that I could get through most of my parenting was explaining things and walking it through, even when I got flustered, because I can tell you that cooking with kids terrifies my entire being. Absolutely does. And they always want to help and you don't want to discourage it, but the likelihood of an accident happening increases exponentially simply because
Yeah.
they're helping you and they don't know what to do and they're not patient. So it's just like, at least I know I was trying to do something right.
Yep. And you bring up a great point that I'm so grateful for you to bring that up. That's what I was saying, like start small and try to remember, you're right, especially if you have those kids that they love to help, right? Little kids love to help. I think preschools do a great job of this. They usually give kids like these little assignments they can do. Like they get to pass out the Jello cup. Like they drop a Jello cup on the floor. It's really not a big deal, right? The cups are usually like the papery things. And, they give these kids these little activities that allows them to feel really important. And then as they get more dexterity, as they get more coordinated, they get bigger tasks. So that was kind of my joke of like, don't let your 3-year-old take your porcelain dishes or, breakable dishes across the kitchen. That's probably not the best thing to start with. And yes, there's a level of patience that is probably Zen-like that many of us don't get to very often because we're all running in a million different directions. So I honor that. But there are times where you just need to say, like, look, I appreciate that you want to help. And right now we need to get it done quickly. And remind me the next time this comes up to teach you how to do it. Right. Or something like that. Right. So giving them the chance that at least recognizing that you see that they want to help, and that's important. And then coming back to it later when you might have some more patience. I've been there a million times where it's thank you for recognizing that. It's, for a lot of parents, I see it myself. I've seen it in many of my friends, right? It's faster for us to do it. But then if we do it, we're going to have to keep doing it for a long time. I have a funny story that I'll share that was a family in this area. The mother was in her 80s and the son was in his 60s. And we went over to visit this family. And it was, I don't remember why, but the son looks over at this 80-something mom and goes, "Mama, make me a sandwich." And I had to leave the room. I could not believe that this person was asking their 80-year-old parent to make them a sandwich. It just was so unfathomable to me. And then when I talked to people later that knew the family better, that was my first introduction to that family. I learned that was the mom had been taking care of that son. There was nothing wrong with the son, like cognitively, physically, perfectly fine. The mom just always took care of everything for him. So even when she was 80, he was still expecting her to do it. That to me, going back to the Halloween theme, that is terrifying to me.
Not only to you, because it sounds terrifying to me as well. I don't want that to be my life. So I totally get it. So I had to start really thinking about how I was doing things and create that independence because I grew up in the city and kidnapping was a thing when I was a kid. It was like a big problem back then. And so when we went to the park, I had to have these conversations, and I always felt guilty that I had to have those conversations with my kids. But it was what I knew, and all of the things that the adults put into us about being safe and paying attention. I just didn't feel like I had another choice. Like if I'm not here, this is what you do. Go into, a store, ask for a manager. If you see an officer, talk to them. If there's a Starbucks, go in there and tell them, hey, this is happening. Can you call my mom, my dad? Have all these things. And then when my daughter wanted to start walking to school, I thought I was going to pass out because I just could not. I, I was like, you want to walk where? And she goes, I want to walk to school. I'm old enough. And I go, oh, absolutely not. And we walked, and I created 3 different ways to walk. We walked those paths through the summer. And then one day she, being a kid, she was like, I could get through this shorter. And she walked through a bunch of cars. She didn't check the cars or anything. And in my mind, I was like, somebody could easily have been in that car hiding. Take the door, hit her with the door, and then she's down for the count. And I lost it. I was like, you cannot do that. What are you doing? And she just looked at me like I was crazy. And then I had to explain to her, I said, you have to pay attention. Just because it's a large object doesn't mean someone's not there. And it was just constantly having those conversations. And now that she's older and she's like, she's going on her own now. She's starting to see me in a different light. But trust me, the paranoia that I had all the time drove her nuts. But I would rather have just explained to her how I was feeling so that she kind of understood why I was coming at it from that perspective. But I always felt like, I was taking away from her youth, but I'm not going to be here forever.
Yeah. And I think, definitely have some compassion for yourself. Because I think what you did while you had fear, and in some cases may have led with it, you definitely still, like, you walked with her, you gave her different paths. What you were doing was kind of what I was talking about before, like having plan Bs. You were giving her the plan Bs, the what to do. So you were getting her ready for, like, if you want to use a sports, metaphor, like you were getting her ready for great game day, right? Like you were giving her the practice. And when she did something that wasn't correct, like you course corrected and explained why. And I think that's good. Like, that's great. Yes, it's still annoying. And yes, it still requires a lot of patience. I think the difference between what you're talking about, which there's still a lot of fear there, right? And paranoia, as you say. However, that's different than the parent that just says, like, no, I'm going to drive you, right? And just doesn't give any of that leniency. So then
Right.
when the kid's 16, they're still getting driven to school because the parent was right? So you did
Mm-hmm.
these small incremental steps that allowed her to eventually feel like she could do it. And for you too, even though the first time's really scary. So I definitely encourage you to watch that Chasing Childhood movie. There are a couple scenes from families that are in New York City, and they're allowing their child to ride the subway, and they have
Right.
cameras with both the kid and the parent. So you can see how they're responding. And obviously that's like slightly doctored because the kid's not completely alone. There's a cameraman in there. But it's still, even with that, there were still moments where the parents kind of got like super nervous, but they, it's just, it'll resonate with you. I have no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. Because I grew up in New York, so I completely understand. And when my nephew started taking the bus, and he not only had to be, in the city, but he had to cross over into Jersey, and that made everybody like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And we were trying to, but he had to do it. There was no other way for him to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
So
the
I'm
big,
definitely gonna watch it.
oh, good. Yeah. You'll have to let me know. Yeah. And I think the big thing, kind of closing up the session tonight, I think the big thing for parents to remember is, you might feel fear, and it's the difference between feeling it and leading with it always, right? So if you just shut everything down because you're afraid, then your child never gets a chance to build that confidence and that autonomy that creates independence in them, right? And so, walking away with this sense of just checking in with yourself and seeing why you're saying no to your teenager going over to someone else's house. Okay, what's there? Has there been past incidents at that house? Like, talk to your kid about it. And for younger kids, I'm always amazed at how good younger kids can reason. When we talk to them about why I don't want them to do X, and you're right, you have to do it over and over again, but keep doing it over and over again, because then they do get it, and then they are safer, and they don't, they finally start to get those things. And it's like repetitive, and just checking in with yourself to make sure that where the no is coming from. I think that's the big thing here, is that to recognize where the no is coming from and how that's impacting your child. That makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. And it's a good thing to remember.
Yeah.
Because it can start an internal discussion with yourself, and then you can just share it with the kid. So it sounds good to me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to stop the recording, and I'm just going to say a sign off real quick. You can hang on if you want. Just thank you, community, for joining us or watching this on your own. Please spread the word about the Parenting and Mental Health series. You can come and watch these sessions on our YouTube page, or I post them on our Facebook page as well. And if you have any questions, post them in the comment section on Facebook, and if you have ideas for what we want to talk about, post them there too. And I'll do my best to cover any topics that people want to cover. Have a great night.